What is up, Evil Dead fans? In this video, we're going to talk about the Evil Dead 2 cabin and the Ash vs. Evil Dead cabin. Now, they are the same cabin in a sense in the whole spectrum of Evil Dead. They are the same cabin. Of course, Ash vs. Evil Dead was built later in 2015, right around there for Ash vs. Evil Dead. So it isn't this exact same cabin. The production company who made it in 2015 for Ash vs. Evil Dead did a fantastic job, phenomenal job in recreating that. But should there be differences from what you see from Ash vs. Evil Dead versus what the end cabin look was in Evil Dead 2? So we're gonna take a look at just some of those differences of what the cabin looked like from the end of Evil Dead 2 to the first time you see it, season 1 in Ash vs. Evil Dead. Let's get started. So the first thing we're talking about is the damage to the overall cabin. At the end of Evil Dead 2, there was a lot of damage. Ash vs. Evil Dead, not so much. Let's take a look at the difference. Now, this is the cabin's first appearance in Ash vs. Evil Dead. If you remember, at the end of Evil Dead 2, the trees were attacking it. It was breaking apart the cabin. As you can see right here, there's not a lot of damage. So let's take a look at some of the damage that happened in Evil Dead 2. Now, this shot is from Evil Dead 2 when the trees are attacking the cabin. This is the back side of the cabin. You can see the back door to the left. You can see a huge gaping hole to the right of it that the trees ripped out. The trees are now attacking the front of the cabin, ripping off the overhang and the porch swing. Now that leads us into the next thing, the porch swing. And as you can see, the porch swing is still there in Ash vs. Evil Dead. It was kind of a flashback to Evil Dead 1 when it's rocking back and forth and hitting the cabin. So I understand why they added that back in there for Ash vs. Evil Dead. Next thing we're going to talk about is Linda's grave. Now, putting a cross in front of a grave is something that happened all across the board in the Evil Dead trilogy. But let's take a look at the cross in Ash vs. Evil Dead and the cross in Evil Dead 2. In Ash vs. Evil Dead, when Ash goes back to the cabin, he notices Linda's grave. He notices the cross that he puts in front of her grave. Now let's look at the cross in Evil Dead 2. In Evil Dead 2, when Linda comes out of the grave, it falls over. Now I know what you're gonna say. Brett, in Evil Dead 2, when Linda popped out of the grave and the cross fell over, she did her dance in the moonlight. Ash was sitting in a rocking chair. He got up to the window. She batted his head against the window a few times and he woke up in the rocking chair. Was he sleeping? Did he imagine it? Did the cross really fall down? The only thing we do know for sure is she did come out of the grave. And did the cross fall down? We don't know. Now, if you want to believe it did, it's fine. If you want to believe it didn't, it's fine. It's kind of up to you on that. So, we don't really know. But let's go on to the next thing. The cabin's front door. As you can see in Ash vs. Evil Dead, the front door to the cabin is intact. As you can see in Evil Dead 2, the cabin door is still there. But guess what? She gone. So with seeing all of that, I'm sure a lot of you are saying, yeah, I already knew that. I already knew that stuff. Well, I'm gonna show you a few more things you might have already known and some things you might have not have caught. So let's take a look at the mirror in the cabin. In Ash vs. Evil Dead, you can see Agent Fisher right there looking at the mirror in the cabin. Now in Evil Dead 2, something happened to that mirror towards the end of the film. Now let's take a look at that. In Evil Dead 2, when the trees were attacking the cabin, the mirror was actually broke. And one thing I didn't show you is after the mirror broke in Evil Dead 2, a tree limb came in from the outside of the wall and smashed all the way through that mirror. So that mirror was completely destroyed. So it couldn't have survived all the way to Ash vs. Evil Dead. Now let's look at a few other things, including the cellar door and the cellar stairs. In Evil Dead 2, Ash had to cut the cellar door in half to get down there. The reason for that is Jake had the keys. Now, Jake was trying to get Ash out of the cellar when Henrietta was attacking Ash. So That's why he had to cut it in half. But let's look at the cellar door in Ash vs. Evil Dead. In Ash vs. Evil Dead, the cellar door is intact, but if you look closely, there is a cut line all the way through it, but there is a brace at the top and bottom of the cellar door. So I don't know if production originally cut it in half, thinking that's what they, the writers wanted or the director wanted, and they just changed it to a full cellar door for what was written in the script. Hard to say, but the cellar door was fully in contact and not busted in half in Ash vs. Evil Dead. Also in Ash vs. Evil Dead, once they open the cellar door, you can see the stairs are intact. Let's see what happened to the stairs in Evil Dead 2. In Evil Dead 2, Ash gets thrown through the cellar stairs by Henrietta. So the stairs are completely broke. So this next thing I'm going to mention, it's just kind of like a little fun fact. It's nothing that's a big deal. I understand why it was changed in Ash vs. Evil Dead versus Evil Dead 2. It's the possessed deer head. Now in the past, I have talked about it and said, hey, that thing is a mule deer. Well, going through and rewatching it again and looking at the shadows of the rack in Evil Dead 2, it is a white-tailed deer. It just has more of a muley kind of look. It's kind of weird, but it is a white-tailed deer. Now, the deer that you see on the wall in the cabin, some people will say it's an elk, but it's really not an elk. It has too many broad tines out front. It is actually a stag. It's called a red stag. It's a smaller version of an elk. It looks like an elk, but it's not an elk. So let's take a look at the differences from Evil Dead 2 to Ash vs. Evil Dead on the possessed deer head. In Evil Dead 2, you can see in the background right here, you can see the possessed deer head. It's not possessed. When I talk about the possessed deer head, it's just so everybody knows what I'm talking about. It's when it's not possessed. You can see that is a white-tailed deer. It's a white-tailed buck. It's native to North America. And here's another shot of it right here. Now with this shot of it, you can really see that it is a white-tailed deer. And now let's take a look at the one in Ash vs. Evil Dead. As you can see here in Ash vs. Evil Dead, they used a red stag. It's found mostly in Europe, not in the US. I do understand why they use this instead of trying to find a white-tailed buck or use an elk. I mean, it looks like an elk. It's basically just a smaller version of it, and Elk Grove is kind of fitting for it. It's just a little fun fact, a little tip. If you didn't know the difference between the two from Evil Dead 2 to Ash vs. Evil Dead, there you go. The next thing we're going to look at is a little bit more of the damage to the cabin. We're going to look at the side windows to the cabin. Now, I'm not talking about the up front side windows next to the front door. The next one's around the corner. So you've got the front door, the two windows, the two next to it around the corner. We're going to look at that in Evil Dead 2 versus Ash vs. Evil Dead. In Evil Dead 2, when the force becomes the flesh, it attacks Ash through those windows with the tree hands. So those windows are completely busted out. But in Ash vs. Evil Dead, that window is still boarded up. It's not busted out. So that's another little thing that didn't transfer over to Ash vs. Evil Dead from Evil Dead 2. So the next thing we're gonna do is go outside the cabin to the workshed. We're gonna look at Linda's severed head. In Evil Dead 2, if you're looking at the bottom of your screen, in the workshed, you can see Linda's severed head is actually on the floor. If you go to Ash vs. Evil Dead, though, her rotting head is still in the vise. One last thing to show you is something you wouldn't expect. It is the kitchen stove. The one in Evil Dead 2 and the one in Ash vs. Evil Dead. Back to this scene in Evil Dead 2. There goes the door, but what's coming next? Oh man, it's the kitchen stove. But in Ash vs. Evil Dead, if you look at the bottom right of your screen, the stove is still in the kitchen when Evil Ash is fighting Agent Fisher in Ash vs. Evil Dead. So there it is, some of the differences of the cabin that you saw at the end of Evil Dead 2 versus the first time you saw it in Ash vs. Evil Dead. Now I know there's more differences, and if you want to put them in the comments, I'd love to hear that. And tell me what you found. And also, question for you guys. Would you have rather seen the cabin at the end of Evil Dead 2 in Ash vs. Evil Dead? Or were you happy with what you saw of the cabin in Ash vs. Evil Dead? Now, I do understand why they couldn't make it all decrepit and broke down. It wouldn't have worked well with the script. So I do get it. I understand that. Regardless, great series, great cabin, iconic. So with that being said, God bless you guys and stay groovy.